In the early months of 2023, I had an itch to find a highly rated Nintendo Switch game to play. In my search, I stumbled along a list for the highest rated Nintendo Switch games from Metacritic, a review aggregator website. While looking at the top of the list, I was surprised to see the number one spot at a whopping 100 out of 100 score taken by a game I have never heard of, a visual novel by the name of The House in Fata Morgana. Reviews had nothing but praise for the game, calling it a masterpiece, with many saying it moved them to tears. Curious as to what Fata Morgana entailed, I decided to experience it for myself. Needless to say, I too was moved to tears and considered The House in Fata Morgana to be a masterpiece in the way it exemplifies the double-sided nature of humanity, showcasing regret, loss, revenge, hatred, perseverance, identity, compassion, and forgiveness deeply entwined in its story and characters. Fata Morgana is a hefty visual novel. The time to read the full story is over 45 hours long, and the bulk of the story is hidden behind a veil of mystery, so it's difficult to give a proper summary without being vague as to not spoil too much, but I'll give it a shot. You wake up in a decrepit mansion, unaware of who you are or your now lost memories. A pale-skinned maid with a calm demeanor greets you as the master of the mansion, who has finally returned home. The maid, noticing that your memories have vanished, suggests touring the mansion and learning the history of the past residents in hopes of your memories' return. She grasps your hand tightly, saying, "No matter what happens, you mustn't let go of my hand." Thus, your journey begins to recover your memories and unravel the mysteries surrounding the tragedies in the Rose Mansion as you progress through each door. The characters in Fata Morgana are unlike any characters I have seen in fiction because of their uniquely realistic motivations and emotions throughout the course of the story. We get to experience the relatively mundane daily life of the characters as if you were living alongside them. You see their successes and their failures, their dreams and their fears, their virtues and their vices, their pasts and their eventual end. Behind each door lies an entirely different generation of people who resided at the mansion with tragedies that befall them, including the protagonist, the amnesiac master of the mansion. I found myself wondering the relevance of these seemingly unrelated tragedies, but each united by the curse of the mansion dooming them to their fate. Nevertheless, the depth of the characters kept me engaged throughout the first 10 hours of the story, as well as my motivation to figure out who the protagonist was, and the origins of the maid, the mansion, and how it set up its residents for tragedy. But I was not prepared for what was behind the fourth door, the tragedy of the mansion's master. After learning the master's identity, the story flipped itself on its head. It felt like the story had only just begun, as the rest of the story focused on the events leading up to the Master's awakening in the mansion, the maid's past with the Master, the mansion, and the curse of the mansion. Beyond the fourth door is where I think Fata Morgana begins to elevate itself to a masterpiece. The first three doors documenting the former residents paled in comparison to the rest of the game. At this point, everything else felt like a fairy tale with archetypical characters. Our true main characters take the stage and reveal their past marked with their own personal suffering, from rejection to abuse and loneliness. Their centuries-long tale makes them some of the most human-like characters I have ever seen in fiction. In most media today, most of us are interested in fast-paced films where tensions are high and give us a thrilling feeling. However, this can dampen our connection with the characters since their development must match the pace of the story. We tend to miss the small nuances in that we are used to experiencing in our daily life, so used to it that we are hardly conscious about it. But Fata Morgana takes its time showing you the small but meaningful moments of the characters' lives, while subtly giving you details on how their past molded them into who they are. But it is also juxtaposed with their suffering, in a prose also giving a first-person perspective of their suffering, with the most brutal details at the forefront. Every time he threw a banquet, he drained me of my blood. It became nearly impossible to find a spot on either of my arms that wasn't a swollen, reddish-black gash. And soon, because my arms weren't providing enough blood for him, the cutting spread to my legs. I lived in a haze of half-consciousness. Honestly, I'm amazed it didn't kill me, though perhaps the Lord was simply taking care not to take more than my body could spare. Would anyone have believed that a scarred and bloodied girl tied up on the floor in the banquet hall was a saint? Unlikely. This was no charitable gathering, but an unholy Sabbath. Perhaps it was caused by my corrupted spirit. Perhaps it was my heart's way of crying for help, or perhaps it was the devil giving me my witch's mark. I felt like I had been suffering alongside them. At one point, I had to put it down for a bit after my heart wrenched watching how the mansion's master suffered at the hands of his own family. But what was the point of all this suffering? Fata Morgana had an answer to this question in a profoundly beautiful way that I could have never expected. Suffering is an experience we characterize as a natural evil, something we strive to prevent. There is no avoiding the deep wounds suffering slices through our minds and hearts. Despite this brute fact of the human experience, we have the ability to make suffering a spark for compassion. We can use suffering as a call to action, to break the cycle of suffering for others as a consequence of understanding another's pain, as the master of the mansion did to his wrongdoers. After all the suffering the master's wrongdoers caused him, he still forgave them without an ounce of hatred in his heart. The house and Fata Morgana's characters demonstrated how, as humans, we also live a life where there can be both immense suffering as well as immense joy. Life is a roller coaster of contrasting moments of happiness and misery. Even the most well-off and secure individuals will suffer in their lives. I have suffered in life, and you have as well. But in some way, somehow, we find the strength to pick ourselves up again, and when we do, we are stronger than we were before. This newfound strength also inspires the same strength in others and makes us strive to prevent the same suffering we once experienced. The human spirit is indeed undefeatable. It is a seed we can plant in the cracks of concrete within the hearts of others.